third presentation of this lot, which I'm actually doing on behalf of the co-authors, which are listed in the first slide that you can see. This paper is perhaps a bit different from the others that you are hearing in this lot and perhaps in the next ones, because we are in a sense concerned with the topic, which is in a sense cognate to the one that we are treating here in the workshop. It has, I think, a few proximities and a good rate of interrelationship with we are talking about, but as perhaps also a bit of difference in terms of how we cope with the term of integrity and how we would actually encourage research on integrity to take place in the future. Basically, what we are dealing in our research right now is lies in the intersection between the corporate world that we know right now and the stake of economic activities which are done in a legitimate industries, of course, by criminal clans, criminal organizations. And we are, in a sense, attracted by this topic for a variety of reasons. One is the fact that in Italy we are witnessing more and more the fact that a large number of industries are infiltrated by criminal organizations, in a sense, not only with corruption practices, which in a sense recall us of more conventional research on corporate social responsibility, but perhaps on a wider and different level, which means that in a few cases, and this is unfortunately a phenomenon which is spreading, we are witnessing situations in which criminal organizations actually in the end control, even if they do not own legally, the firm which acts into the legitimate industry. So I think this is a sort of different sort of topic that we have to cope with when we talk about integrity, because there are cases in which we end up having situations in which we study apparently legitimate firms, which in the end have been or may be declared by prosecutors, by magistrates, which of course are in charge of prosecuting crimes when they are committed, which are declared owned ultimately by criminal clans. This, of course, opens up quite an interesting domain, as we are sort of seeing together in the next few minutes, because reminds us of a situation in which integrity is sort of outplaced, because we have to study this topic by having a look at different sort of literature to understand this sort of shifting borders between legitimate and criminal organizations. So we are focusing on the dynamics of this gray area between legitimate and criminal business, and we sort of labeled the criminal firm as a firm which, in a sense, is used by criminal organizations as a tool to carry out organized economic crime. Of course, we are dealing with situations in which criminal firm operates in a legitimate market, so we may be ourselves customers of these entities, even if we do not know, and even if we discover this after 10 years that the inquiry has been ended and the magistrates have declared this reality. And we have to cope with the situation in which either these organizations are created directly or acquired directly by criminal clans by means, of course, of other sort of intermediate entities which are apparently legitimate and active as a legal entity. Or, of course, when we have situations in which these organizations are sort of a tool that legitimate industry exploit to carry out some dirty work that they do not really want to be involved in, or in cases in which they want to have cheaper sort of goods or services that they can procure through this channel. So we have quite a gray area, as we can perhaps think of it, in which the legitimate and the criminal or illegal words are, in a sense, touching each other or contaminating each other. So we were stuck in this reflection how we can sort of understand and study issues about CSR or corporate social responsibility when this dynamic is taking place. And we decided to study these, of course, sample situations in which we have in the same sort of bunch, legitimate firms or criminal entities, institutions, stakeholder, professionals, in some cases politicians, acting together in a sort of dirty situation in which everybody is sort of having an advantage on it. We are studying a few case studies in Italy for a variety of reasons. Of course, we are much more familiar also with legislation in that country because we are from there, and we can sort of have easier access to judicial resources, and we can, in a sense, interpret them better because by studying the subject, you have, in a sense, to cope also with terminologies that are drawn directly by judiciary context or judiciary acts which have been written by magistrates or public officials. In Italy, this phenomenon is quite growing, and the amount of economic activities which has been declared as owned, ultimately owned by these entities, is growing. For instance, a few weeks ago, at the peak of the economic crisis in Italy, there was quite an influential article written in the press which declared that now the so-called mafia organizations are to be declared as the first bank active in the country because they have much cash, and unlike commercial banks, they have different sort of strategies to lend money, and they do not actually follow the same procedures in terms of guarantees that conventional commercial banks may follow. So they are following different strategies, of course, in lending their money, and with the economic crisis, with the recession, they are becoming even more powerful because they sort of have cash, and they are not risking that much in lending that out because they can sort of having it back in a different way, as we can imagine. We studied, as I said, these case studies by using a qualitative research methodology, which is based basically on two major sources. One is the wide variety of judiciary acts that deal with these situations or with these topics. The other sort of typology of information or data sources is directly by talking with a few magistrates which are supporting our sort of research and have been very active in sort of disclosing us which were the most interesting cases to be studied by using our own instruments. Of course, there are a few difficulties in coping with these entities because of obvious reasons. So no, you cannot really, of course, do research on the ground. You have to deal with situations which cannot really be disclosed until they have been declared in a certain way by magistrates or by the ultimate degree of magistrates. You cannot say that someone is a criminal or belongs to mafia unless it has been declared until the very end of this process. Otherwise, you risk yourself and you can be sued if he is cleared of that charge after 10 or 5 or 3 years. Depends on the amount of time that is given to that sort of trial. So these are evidently difficulties that affect this sort of research. But on the other hand, we sort of believe that some contribution to our understanding of how legitimate industries work may come from a few selected cases in this domain. So we are going now to go through these 3 case studies. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time to enter into many details as I wished, but still I just try to give you the glance of what we are facing. The first case study we were coping with deals with the construction of a large port infrastructure in Italy, in the south part of Italy, in Calabria. It's called the Port of Gioia Tauro, which is an initiative which has been conceived since from the beginning by one very active and well-known entrepreneur in Italy called Angelo Ravano, who was managing this multinational entity called Contship. It was a big project, heavily funded also by European Union, by the way. What is interesting as a sort of glimpse from this case study is the fact that if we study the whole official inquiry and the final declaration or statements of the magistrates, we see that this guy, starting from the beginning when he conceived the whole project, did not consider the criminal counterparts active in that area as his enemy. But he considered them as a sort of necessary counterpart in order to to develop that project, because you cannot really build a large infrastructure of hundreds of millions of euros in Calabria without having in mind the fact that sooner or later you will have to sort of deal with these entities we are talking about. So in this way, the way in which the conventional, and the legitimate and the legal entities overlapped was, for instance, related to the fact that the criminal clans asked since from the beginning a sort of percentage in terms of dollars of containers which are going to be moved in the infrastructure, and they accepted that from the beginning, as it has been declared, as I was saying, by magistrates. So this is a sort of judiciary truth. We can tell that without having any risk. Different situations, for instance, constructions of high-speed train construction sites in northern Italy, in the Milan area. So an area in which perhaps one would think that the influence of these entities would be not so strong as it is in the south part of the country, for obvious reasons. Different situation in which, according to magistrates which have sort of ruled this process, they discovered a situation in which there was a criminal logic of allocation of subcontracts from the major multinational, well-established entities to small subcontractors, of course. And this process of allocation of works were, in a sense, mastered and managed centrally by a sort of small committee of people that had an interest in this situation and that were meeting regularly and were deciding to what extent a certain amount of works should have been carried out by the firm X or by the firms Y or Z. So a sort of hidden trust of people with different interests in this situation, which for years has been able to bias the way in which competition was taking place in this domain. Different situation again, case we can label ECO4, and it deals with a situation related to waste collection and removal problem. You probably have heard in the last few years the tragic situation that sometimes has taken place in a few Italian regions, and the fact that waste collection and removal has become more and more a problem. We are concerned in this peculiar part of the case study with the process that led one of the company which was awarded the contract to be exploited to carry out the waste collection and removal process in that area, to select the private partner. It is in many cases a joint venture between public and private partners or entities. In one of the cases we analyzed, we could see the fact that this process of choosing the private partner was conditioned heavily by the hidden influence of criminal power. In particular, we saw that the tendering procedure was, in a sense, biased and regulated by external influence dictated by criminal entities. One of the focus of our paper is actually this very much process of public tendering, the situation in which you have public money that must be sort of awarded for carrying out infrastructure, as we have seen, or instead for services, but which requires the open up of a competition in a given area. In many cases, we could witness situations in which the public tendering procedure, even if formally was declared as clean and straightforward, had some hidden problems. For instance, in a few cases, you could witness the fact that only one company was sort of applying for having that contract, and that happened again and again and again in different contexts according to evidently to a sort of more central project on that area, which means that there was sort of some entity which was, in a sense, regulating that industry. So you didn't have a real competition. You had a situation in which you had the public tendering, you were respecting the EU rules, but on the other side, the procedures was okay, but the outcome was, in a sense, managed externally by someone else. So we went out to follow and articulating the analysis of the different degrees of the procurement processes, and we sort of studied different situations in which we had the influence of criminal entities on the awarding of tendering procedures. One interesting case, of course, related to the Eco4 domain was the fact that there was a broad availability of legitimate firms or public servants and even politicians to, in a sense, act for only a pure personal advantage in disregarding and avoiding any consideration for a broader societal integrity. So you had the situation in which everybody was earning money, but in the end, the garbage was there in the streets. So the money was spent, the process was apparently perfect, the rules were followed, but the garbage was not collected in the end. So this is perhaps a bit strange. And we had a sort of scheme to trace the influence of criminal clans to affect the different steps of the procurement process, which of course now we cannot really enter into the details. So just to draw a few conclusions in the next few minutes. We have sort of witnessed different strategies that criminal organizations use and make avail themselves in order to exert some sort of conditioning of, on the public tendering procedures. For instance, in the case of Gioia Tauro port, we don't really have the traditional tools adopted by criminal organizations. So we don't have intimidation or physical threat along the way, but we had more sort of consensus since from the beginning. In the case of high-speed trains, we could witness a situation in which there was this criminal reputation of criminal clans that conditioned the awarding of the work since from the beginning. And this could be traced as an entrepreneurial ability even. So this was the ability to retrace a whole picture in which everybody was sort of obtaining a part of those works, but again, without any concern with the problem of global integrity. Just to sum it up in the next 2 minutes, perhaps, in some of the cases we analyzed, rather than corrupting or bribing public officials, we could see a different strategy, a situation in which criminal clans had the chance to infiltrate their own affiliates and to appoint them even to public offices. We term this strategy as infiltration of even public power. Of course, the possibility of having a sort of influence on the broader economic system depends very much on a variety of local sort of requirements. For instance, the possibility of controlling even military territory, the possibility of sort of lending money, as we have seen before, the possibility of practicing corruption or infiltration, depending on the local sensibility of local politicians, and also the degree of local development of that territory. In places in which you don't really have very much economic development, you end up having a very big power also of on the local territory and on the voters, on the people, if you guarantee them a job. So if you are able to organize a situation in which some development is taking place, think at the situation we have seen in the port of Gioia Tauro, everybody sort of is happy, even if they know that there is something hidden which is acting on the back, because in the end you have some local development which is better than underdevelopment at all. So the only question that I wanted to sort of launch myself with before entering the final discussion was that one. What emerges is sort of a picture in which we have legitimate firms which apparently respect formal rules and laws, but they deal with other firms that are controlled by criminal organizations which want to exploit a huge amount of resources, of different sort of resources, which have been otherwise precluded. And in many cases, these organizations, even if they apparently believe in the sort of the declaration of integrity, they are forced to act in a context which is biased by these entities. So if they want to carry on, they have to sort of come to terms with these intricacies that we have sort of tried to depict in our paper. I think I can sort of end it up right now, and I would be glad if we could sort of launch a few discussions on the point. Thank you very much.